Welcome to Talkin' Baseball. Today we are joined by a very special guest, and we're talking about one-day players. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Talkin' Baseball. Another episode, Friday episode. Our midday episode was on Tuesday this week because that article came out, but we are going to try and do 3 episodes a week now, and we're excited about that. We've been rolling out a lot of interviews with players. This is an interview with an author, but a fun and good conversation all the same. My name is JOMBOY, and I'm joined, as always, by my best friend, Jake Storielli, producer BBD, also here with us. Jake, how are you doing?
Doing all right, Jimmer Fredette. Living that quarantine life. Starting to find somewhat of a routine.
Okay.
Just with a little bit of recording. Usually a daily WALK with Noodle the Doodle Dog. And yeah, just chewing the fat and being the kid.
Yeah, that's good for you, man. I've found a good routine for myself, living that mask life. I hate the masks.
I hate the mask, but it's kind of nice.
I hate it, though. Like, I don't want to go outside. I hate masks. When I was a little kid, I wouldn't do Halloween because my mom would try to buy me masks even when I was really little, and I just ripped them off.
Yep.
Just foggy in your face, gross. Like, I can't.
Wetting. Yep.
Oh, Katie was laughing at me because I'm like, I'm sweating. She's like, it's not even hot out. I'm like, I'm wearing a mask.
I am full tilt with you there. My mom used to try to make me wear this skeleton Halloween costume where the mask was a face pillow. And it just had holes for the eyes and the mouth. And I was like, no, you're going to kill me. So yeah, it's a really catch-22, but it's better to have the mask on and breathe heavy through the mask than not have the mask on and breathe scared.
Yeah, but I hate masks so much.
Oh yeah.
Some people are fine in them. I envy that. Anyway, we have an interview that we did before we got to quarantine. Jacob Kornhauser. It's a pretty cool book. You're going to hear a lot about it. We asked him about it. It's called The Cup of Coffee Club, and it's a collection of stories about guys who played one game in Major League Baseball, worked their butts off, reached their dream, played one game. There's some really good stories. We talk about a couple. We talk about some in full. Let's just throw it right to that, right?
Yeah.
We'll play our transition sound.
Transition sound.
Joining us now is Jacob Kornhauser, author of The Cup of Coffee Club, book about 11 players and their brush with baseball history. Jacob, how are you doing today? Thank you for joining us.
Good, just chilling in quarantine,
Thinking about baseball.
Exactly, daydreaming about baseball.
So do you go by Jacob? Because we have another Jake on the show with us. So Big Jacob. Yep. He's not even Jacob.
Don't lump us, yeah.
Yeah, his birth name
the
is
Jacobs and the Jakes have tried to link up throughout time, and it just hasn't worked. So today will be another test, and we'll see where we land. But, yeah, man, quarantine times, and we were just joking beforehand, hey, hell of a time to have a baseball book because we all need it. We all need it.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement with the game of baseball or love of the game of baseball?
Sure. Yeah, I just like a lot of baseball writers or people who cover it like you guys. I grew up just loving it and kind of liking writing about it, reporting on it. My background is in journalism. So wanted to do some sort of endeavor like this to be able to report on a book, kind of a more full-fledged story. To be able to tell people, and that's how I got into this book specifically, but my background is in more of the recording realm.
I was going to ask, when did this idea spark? For me, this feels like a baseball reference deep dive that went into a book. And I mean, I say that lovingly because any baseball fan loves a baseball reference deep dive. Jake and I find ourselves on there. I've made some videos about just going in there and you just find these random players. And that's kind of what you're doing is taking these players who had a brush with baseball history and you kind of give their full story. So where was the spark of the idea for this?
Yeah, it was a couple years ago, talking with a buddy of mine who's also a huge baseball fan. We were just throwing basically ideas about cool baseball stuff back and forth. And I kind of brought up this idea, thinking of Moonlight Graham, stuff like that. And we kind of just both looked at each other and we're like, oh, that's a good idea. We didn't know how much there was to be done on it. But like you said, kind of did a baseball reference deep dive on it. The last 50 or 60 years, there's not that many guys like that. So started eliminating some guys. I only wanted to obviously be able to talk to guys for the book. So anyone who's passed away since kind of took them off the list. So rounded it out to a list of like 25 or so. And obviously narrowed it back down to 11 for the guys that I actually talked to for the book.
I was going to ask how many there were. There's only around 25. Well, that's living. How many total do we have a number that had, and for anyone that it's just one game in the MLBs,
Right.
like they could have been called up for a period of time, but the actual game log, one game.
Right.
So how many players are there?
Yeah, so 25 was just the list that I had of like their story was interesting enough. They're alive to tell their story, stuff like that. So in the last 50 years or so, there's only been about 150 or so. Before that, there were a lot more. So overall, there's roughly 1,000.
Damn.
Yeah, that's crazy.
It's a crazy sport.
And I know, so you've got, what you don't realize yet is you have two demographics right here talking to you. Is Jimmy loves reading and baseball. I don't read at all, so I will need your pitch on a non-reader on why I should do this. But Jimmy was telling me before, he's like, man, this is emotional, all the stories and stuff, blah, blah, blah. For me, I said, yeah, obviously, because maybe the saddest thing I've seen on a baseball field, and luckily it's taken care of itself since, but a prospect named Dustin Fowler, who's now in the A's, made his debut for the Yankees. And Yankees had like a big rally in the first inning. He was left on deck. The next half inning, he's in the field and he slides into the wall. He like shattered both his knees or something.
Shattered his kneecap at Comiskey or whatever it's called.
Yeah, and for me, I was I had a couple buddies that cracked cheeky jokes because that's what you do with your buddies. And I was like, yo, stop. Like this dude's career, I mean, he could go down. He could be in the book, and he could be arguably the saddest story because he just missed his at bat. Like it could be all over. Luckily, he's come back up and he's played for Oakland a little bit.
He was leading off the next inning.
So yeah, so I don't know, man. Like, I'm getting emotional thinking about it. What
That's not even why why it's.
Do you track? Were you like tracking those stories? Like, did I say Dustin Fowler and you're like, oh yeah, we had our eye on him. He was a big prospect for us. Or how does that work?
Then
man?
He got another at bat. Damn it!
Get out of here.
Yeah, kind of in just looking at some of these guys, I wasn't aware of their careers when they were playing. The dates range from 1958 to 2008 in the book in terms of when they debuted. But I kind of lived your experience in reporting this of just hearing, some of these heartbreaking stories of these guys who, for all intents and purposes, should have had more than one game in the major leagues. But then on the flip side of it, there were a few of them that really had no business getting to the major leagues,
right.
Whether it be because there was a major injury or something else that should have prevented them and probably prevented thousands of other players from rising to the major leagues. And they did end up making it. So there were two sides of the coin where there were some heartbreaking ones where guys should have had longer major league careers. But then the other side was there were plenty of guys who really didn't seem like they probably were going to make the majors. And so having that one game was really a blessing.
And for me, I haven't read every chapter, but I've read a handful because I just wanted to get a feel of the book and the players and the stories that we're telling that you told in this. And for me, when I told Jake it's emotional, I'm not even talking about the fact that they only got one at bat or one game in the majors. That because for them, that's the high. That's they reached the top of Mount Everest. You are telling human stories. Like, I don't want to give too much away, but we'll have to talk about it a little bit. But like Bannister's story, Jeff Bannister, manager for the Texas Rangers, is incredible. And then the last one, Tupman in 2008. Jake, like, all right, I told my producer this, and I know it's your story, but can you tell Jake and the listeners the relationship with him and his father? Because I cried while reading it, and it's nothing to do with the fact that this guy, only got one game in the majors or one plate appearance. It's just you're sharing human stories, and I think that is the best thing because you're making the baseball player relatable and just letting people know how much is going on in their lives. So can you share did you share the Tubman story with his dad if you don't mind?
Yeah, of course. And I appreciate that because that was kind of the goal of all of this was to make these guys relatable. The average fan feels like they could have been in their footsteps. Obviously, it takes a decade or more of work to actually do it, but to be relatable was a big goal of mine. But for Tupman, his dad was like his biggest fan, one of the guys that really was, always shaping his baseball upbringing. And so his dad would come to his minor league games and stuff as he was moving up. And his dad ended up passing away, unfortunately, before he ended up making his major league debut. So from that point on, Matt would take a hat for his most recent call up, whatever team that he got called up by, and he would go to his dad's grave and put the hat there. And so he ended up playing his one game for the Royals. And so obviously it kind of culminates in being able to put a Royals hat. Yeah.
Say, Dad, I made it to another level. Mm-hmm. Like that, it was just tearjerker. And I mean, if you get the book, I mean, I'm sure that you worked hard on order, or it's in chronological order. The Tubman story is the last one because it's 2008. And it is a whirlwind of a story. It has everything you need. It's got that. Yep. It's got, Jake, do you know Trey Hillman? Does that name ring a bell?
Not really.
He was the manager of the Royals at the time, and apparently a giant asshole.
Sure.
And I'm sure in the unfiltered interview
Matt's not a huge fan of Trey Hillman.
He refused to play him. He was up for 2 weeks as a backup catcher, and they refused to give him the at-bat. And the only way he got the at-bat was because, do you want to share this? Because this is amazing as well.
Yeah. So he formed a relationship with a few guys playing in like winter leagues and stuff, and ended up actually getting someone to basically. He didn't incite this, but privately, they basically in a doubleheader, I think in Miami, had him fake heat stroke, so to speak, or say he was like getting symptoms of heat stroke, so that they would have to put Matt Tupman in. So they basically forced Hillman's hand to have to play him.
And it was like a day game after a night game, and Hillman still refused to play him. Just a big-time jerk. He's from Boston. He wants to go put on the Red Sox uniform because the next game is in Fenway, but Buck is coming back from paternity leave, and he's going to back up catcher. He begs the manager, Hillman, just like, let me travel with the team. Let me put the uniform on in Boston. They don't send him down until they arrive in Boston, and right before the game, Hillman tells him, actually, you're not dressing up, and you can't even be in the dugout. Here's some tickets to the wives section. And he watched from the wives section. And his quote is, that's just kind of how the Royals operated back then. So now I hate the Royals.
Sure.
I hate them.
Yeah, it's just a crazy story. He's at Fenway because he, like you said, grew up in like New England, big Red Sox fan. And then, he's sitting with his best friend who was there to see him play at the stadium that they went to, growing up to get to play. And I guess, we've talked enough about Tupman's story that we can kind of give, more tidbits about it, is that game that he was at was the day that John Lester threw a no-hitter.
Yeah.
And so we watched from the stands. He could have been one of the guys that maybe broke it up, a pinch hit appearance late, but he was watching from the stands.
He did get a pinch hit appearance. He got a base hit. So a lot of the guys that you did write about were successful in their one outing, right?
Yeah. I would say the majority of the guys in the book were pretty successful.
Did anyone that you reached out to talk about their one game, were they too still bitter or angry that they didn't even want to have the conversation with you and relive it all?
No, I only had a couple tell me that they didn't want to be part of it, and they didn't necessarily say that it was because they were bitter. I'm sure it played into it. Kevin Morgan, who was in the Mets front office, he got back to me and basically said he had no interest in doing it. And there were a couple other cases where I got in touch with relatives or other people related to them, and they said they didn't want to talk about it. But there was no one who overtly said, I'm still mad about all this and don't want to talk to you.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. A lot of them were like, look back at it fondly. And, there's some stories that you shared that the players themselves were like, I realized that this wasn't for me. You talk a lot about the mental fortitude it takes to actually grind through the minor leagues and make it. And, some guys were like, man, like that wasn't worth it. and other guys, have this a very different look on, like Tubman's walk-up song was Boulevard of Broken Dreams because that's what he said the minor leagues was. So all those tidbits you put in there, I think it's fascinating. And I was having a conversation about the book with our producer here, and there was a pitcher for the Yankees last year. What was his name? Adonis Rosa.
Yeah.
Adonis Rosa. And he was never a prospect. He's never been on anyone's list. But somehow he got into a game, and as Yankee fans and as sports fans, you kind of see that appearance and you're kind of like laughing, like, who the hell's this guy? Oh, yeah, remember Adonis Rosa? And I think that's fair. Like, fans can have those thoughts. But what your book does, and there's a couple other books about minor league baseball, is like, for Adonis Rosa, he probably cried before, probably cried after. His parents probably cried. His whole, neighborhood probably celebrated. Like, these are huge, huge moments that we kind of laugh at because we know, we judge major leaguers compared to the 10% that are amazing and not the 80% that climb a mountain just to get there. So I really like that. There's a guy, if I can ask you to share one more. I don't know if you did a full paragraph, full chapter on him, but I thought his story was really good at the beginning. Let me find out. I wrote his name. I'm gonna butcher this name. Pakorik, the 18-year-old Pakior.
Oh, John Pachorik.
Pachorik? Yeah, there's no way. Can you share his story a little bit because it's actually fascinating.
Yeah, he's kind of regarded as the best cup of coffee player of all time.
It's a dubious honor.
5 times out of 5.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, he was a teenager still when he was with the Astros. And so he reaches base all 5 times. Everyone's going crazy. The next season, he's, the next hot thing. And then he gets injured in spring training and never gets into another major league game. So he's kind of the best example of a what if story in terms of he basically did as well as you could in one game and just never got back.
Yeah. 3 hits, 2 walks, right?
Yeah, 2 walks and 3 base hits.
And I think what my mind is circling on when Jimmy mentioned it before is that a lot of people look back at this fondly because it's, a special day in their life. They played Major League Baseball. That's what, only that group of 20,000 people can say, in the history of the world. I was wondering, was there relationships or because there's a lot of these guys that never got that one day in the history of minor league baseball that maybe deserved over some of these guys? Was there any conversation about that, or was there any research on your end with any of those other Crash Davis types or anything like that?
Nothing where there was a direct one-to-one comparison within the organization. One of the things in the opening chapter I wanted to establish before talking about any of the guys was kind of how timing plays into all this. And I use the example of this guy, Chase Lambin, who was in the Mets organization. He was killing it. He had kind of reached his minor league peak, improving AA, AAA back-to-back years. But then Jose Reyes and David Wright are debuting, and so he's blocked. He can't get any playing time. He played on the left side of the infield. And then you compare that to a guy like Ronnie Cedeno with the Cubs. I'm a Cubs fan. I remember him playing, and he had no business playing in the major leagues, really. But he got 10 seasons because basically he got an audition with the Cubs, was seen in a major league uniform, essentially. And so he got more playing time. So I think the overarching idea of the fact that timing plays such a big role was the bigger takeaway than like direct one-to-one organizational comparisons.
Yeah, being blocked, if you're behind Trout, if you're behind Jeter, the Yankees didn't have any shortstops come up for 20 years. And there's, that one guy sued the Yankees because of that, but he was a bit of a crazy person.
And do we see, and I don't know if trending is the right word for any of this, but I feel like baseball is at a weird spot right now with service time and veterans where, and just the way that the roster is used, that, we've started watching old games and it was like a bench player is a bench player. And now baseball doesn't really work like that. Everyone's kind of got their role on their team. You're either you platoon or you do something on the team, where back in the day it was like, here's our 9, these guys are on the bench, where Yankees history, I look at someone like Ronald Torres, who was well-liked and could play every infield position, that, back on those 90s teams, maybe he was a Luis Sojo that was just there. And like Luis Sojo was never fighting for at-bats, where nowadays, between the money veterans make and, just giving young guys opportunities and having a bigger role on the team, like, do you think there's more cup of coffee clubs coming or less? Or does it not even work like that?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
I think that maybe there might be more, if for no other reason than the expanded rosters in terms of being able to call a guy up, send him back down. If it's a guy that is a fringe player, which obviously all the cup of coffee club players are by definition, maybe they get a chance that they wouldn't otherwise. And in September, there's more guys that maybe get a chance that never get back. But I don't know. I don't think there will be a tremendous amount more. There's been an average about 3 per year for the last 50 years or so. So I'd say it'd probably stay around that.
Yeah, at first I thought it was going to be more because the shuttle they run with the relief pitchers now is just crazy.
Right.
But they're also dropping the September call-ups to just 28, which that's going to lessen it a little bit. There was your Cubs fan, and this is a name that I think I should know, but I'm blanking on it. The Cubs fan who
Greenberg.
Yeah, they signed a 1-day contract so he could come back, right? He got hit in the head.
Well, yeah. He played with the Marlins and actually got to play. And I think he went like 0 for 4 or something in his one game. Yeah.
The other great thing I think that, from the stories I read that you highlight is the behind the scenes and the money. Like when Jeff Bannister finally got called up, he signed his 1-day contract for like $97,000, and this was in 81 or something like that. And there's so much that goes into a call up besides just getting to pitch. You think about, obviously you have your story and your day-to-day, and Bannister showed up so early to the clubhouse that security had to let him in and all that. And the Bannister story is insane, but I already kind of ruined a whole chapter for you or gave out the details of a whole chapter, so I won't go too deep into it. But I was like, holy smokes. I know the name. I didn't know all that. So go read that one.
His story's crazy.
Yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to tell us about the book, or do you want Jimmy just to sneakily add his chapters?
I think an interesting thing is kind of the last chapter, so to speak, that just has a lot of stories of guys who aren't around anymore, but whose stories I thought were interesting enough and important enough to add. So there's one that's just kind of a comedy of errors of the 1912 Tigers, stemming from Ty Cobb getting suspended and a bunch of replacement players having to play for the Tigers. And then there's 2 World War II era guys, one of whom pitched on one leg and one of whom was killed in action in World War II. And he was actually one of only 2 major league players who was killed in World War II.
Wow.
So all 3 of those stories, they range in emotions. There's one like super uplifting story, one super kind of depressing but inspiring story. And then there's one, the Ty Cobb one is just hilarious because it's just one of those old time baseball stories that you can't help laughing at while you're reading about it.
Yeah. You got baseball covered right there.
Is Eddie Goodell considered a cup of coffee player? Do you guys familiar?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, he's on the website, bro.
Yeah, okay.
I'm a website guy.
There's a website? You got a website for the book?
Sorry?
There's a website for the book?
Oh, yeah, baseballcoffeeclub.com. It's basically just supplementary little snippet stories
Okay.
Of one-game players. So basically what you'd expect from like a normal little article rather than kind of these long-form stories.
Do you want to share like Eddie Goodell's story? If there's a listener that doesn't know it, I feel like they need to know that story.
Yeah. So, and I actually have the Bill Veeck autobiography sitting on my shelf. And he was a crazy kind of pioneer of promotions and different stuff. And so he wanted to run a promotion where he basically had a small person back for the team. And so I guess there was this guy, Eddie Goodell, who was sort of this performer. And he was, I believe, 3'8", something along those lines.
3'7".
And
3'7". Short Kings represent.
And so, yeah, they had him bat, and they made him number 1/8 because of his size.
Times
and,
are
of
different.
course, he drew a walk. And I believe that they outlawed him signing long-term or something like that because they wanted him to just draw walks all the time. I don't know how they actually did that, but this was a long time ago. And basically this event like spiraled his life sort of out of control in almost like a depressing way. But it's a really, really weird example of one game players.
Yeah, I just brushed up on the end of his story, and it's really sad. So we'll just get off that one. But it's the first half of the story is funny and wild. I mean, yes. I think it's a very interesting book. I'm a big fan of baseball and the minor league journey, so I'm enjoying reading it. And like I said, it's actually the all of the story before they get to the majors. That's the more interesting part for me, because what you did is you found interesting stories and the path. So I think you did a really good job. I'm enjoying reading it. So thanks for sending it over, and thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
What
appreciate you having me on, guys.
Any Cubs takes this year? Jimmy's kind of high on the Cubs.
Any Cubs takes?
Yeah.
Well, when it was going to be a 162-game season, it was going to be fun to watch them win like 84, 85 games.
Yep.
So, I don't know. The NL Central is not very good, but I think the Reds are probably the team to beat. They don't have much experience, but their roster is the best. So I'd put them as like a slight favorite.
That division in a shortened season is madness.
It's going to be awesome.
It's going to be chaos.
Basically a roulette table.
Oh, don't even.
Cool. All right. Thank you, man. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
All right. That was that. Thank Jacob for coming on. If you're interested in the book, pick it up. Tell him you picked it up. Tell him you enjoyed the interview. I enjoyed the book a lot. I read more chapters since that interview. They're like short little mini stories about players. Jeff Bannister's story, we didn't do a deep dive in it because I kind of gave away that entire chapter for him, so I didn't want to give away another entire chapter. Yeah. Jeff Bannister's story is amazing. I still have some more to read. I'm like doing it like one at a time, and then I go back to my other book. But they're really good. I mean, it's really interesting, and I gave it a lot of love during the interview, but it's good.
Yeah,
you basically read it now, Jake.
It's tough because I'm not a reader. It's not something I do. But that was kind of the angle I played. And I mean, the one line that'll stick out, and if anyone ever references that book to me, it'll be, I forget if it was Bannister or if it was someone else who said, someone asked them if it was worth it. And they were like, it was worth it for me. Like it probably wasn't worth it to 99.99999% of the rest of the population, but it's worth it to me. And that shows a true baseball sicko.
It is disgusting. All right. That ends this. We hope you have a great weekend. Hope quarantine life is treating you well. Have some more interviews for you coming up next week. Hopefully there's some more news. Hopefully it's not ridiculous news stories like we heard before. But we wish you all well. We love you. And we will see you on Monday. How about that?